The cowboy had no money, so her father tested the one thing wealth couldn't buy. By sunrise, everyone in Coldwater knew that Samuel Hart had turned away the richest man in the county. What no one knew was that a penniless cowboy was riding toward the Hart Ranch to ask for the very same thing. The year was 1884, and northern Wyoming had already begun to smell like winter. Frost covered the grass along the creek. Thin ice formed inside the horse troughs before morning, and the wind came down from the hills with a warning in it. Eli Mercer felt that wind through the holes in his coat as he guided his mare toward the ranch house. He was 24 years old and owned little more than the horse beneath him, a worn saddle, 2 shirts, and a silver watch that no longer worked. The watch had belonged to his father. Eli kept it in his vest pocket even though its hands had stopped at 12 minutes past 4 nearly 10 years earlier. That was the hour his father had died. Whenever Eli faced something that frightened him, his thumb found the smooth edge of that watch. That morning, he touched it 3 times before reaching the gate. The Hart Ranch spread across the valley like a small kingdom. Cattle moved through the pale grass. Smoke rose from the stone chimney. A red barn stood against the gray sky, strong enough to endure any storm the mountains could send. Eli had repaired part of that barn the previous summer. He had also dug 2 fence posts near the South Creek, broken a wild colt for Samuel Hart, and carried flour from town when the supply wagon lost a wheel. None of those jobs had required him to walk to the front door. This one did. Inside the ranch house, Samuel Hart stood by the kitchen window, watching Eli tie his mare to the rail. Samuel was 58, broad in the shoulders and slow in his movements. His hair had turned white at the temples, but his back remained straight. Men in Coldwater trusted his word more than they trusted signed paper. That did not mean they found him kind. His wife, Margaret, placed a cup of coffee near his hand. "You knew he would come," she said. Samuel did not look away from the window. "I suspected. You have been watching the road since first light." "I was watching the weather." Margaret glanced at the clear sky, then hid a small smile. Across the room, their daughter Clara stood beside the stove with a folded dishcloth in her hands. She was 21, with chestnut hair and quiet green eyes that missed very little. She had heard the hoofbeats before either of her parents had spoken. Now her fingers tightened around the cloth. Samuel noticed. He noticed everything. 3 days earlier, Silas Crowley had come to the same house wearing a black wool coat and polished boots. Silas owned the bank, half the grain storage in Coldwater, and more land than most men could ride across before dark. He had asked Samuel for permission to marry Clara. Samuel had refused before the coffee grew cold. Silas had not taken the answer well. "A woman should be grateful for security," he had said, his face turning red. "My daughter is not a piece of land you can purchase," Samuel replied. Silas left with anger in his eyes and a promise hidden behind his teeth. Now Eli Mercer stood on the porch wearing boots covered in dust and holding a hat that had been repaired twice. He knocked once. Margaret opened the door before Samuel could reach it. "Morning, Eli." "Morning, Mrs. Hart." His voice was steady, but the hat trembled slightly in his hands. Clara saw it. She also saw him press his thumb against his vest pocket. Samuel entered the hall. "You came early." "Yes, sir." That usually means a man is eager or foolish. Eli swallowed, could be both. Margaret looked down to hide another smile. Samuel did not smile at all. He led Eli into the kitchen. Clara moved toward the back room, but her father stopped her. "Stay." She turned in surprise. Samuel pulled out a chair for Eli, then sat across from him. Margaret poured coffee. Outside, Eli's mare shifted near the rail and the leather reins creaked in the cold. Eli placed his hat on his knees. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then he looked directly at Samuel. "I came to ask permission to court Clara with marriage in mind." The words landed heavily in the room. Clara's breath caught. Margaret lowered the coffee pot. Samuel's face remained unreadable. "What do you have to offer her?" he asked. Eli had prepared an answer during the entire ride. Now every polished word disappeared. He looked at his rough hands. "I have no ranch." Samuel waited. "No savings worth naming." Samuel continued to wait. "My work at the Dalton spread may end when the snow comes." Eli drew the broken watch from his pocket and held it in his palm. "My father left me this. It does not work, and it is not worth much. Still, I have carried it since I was 14 because he once told me a man should never make a promise he cannot keep." He closed his fingers around it. "I cannot promise Clara an easy life. I cannot promise silk dresses or a house with glass in every window, but I can promise she will never face hardship alone. I can promise I will tell her the truth, even when the truth costs me something. And I can promise that whatever home we build, she will be respected in it." Clara turned her face toward the stove, but not before Eli saw the shine in her eyes. Samuel leaned back. "You speak well. I speak honestly. Those are not always the same thing." "No, sir." The wind pressed against the house. Somewhere in the barn, a loose hinge gave a low cry. Samuel studied the young cowboy for so long that Eli began to hear his own heartbeat. At last, Samuel stood and walked to the window. "Silas Crowley offered my daughter money, land, and a house in town." Eli's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I told him no." Eli looked up. Samuel turned from the glass. "I do not need a wealthy man for Clara." Hope rose in Eli's chest, sudden and dangerous. Then Samuel continued. "But I do need to know whether you are the man you claim to be." He opened a drawer near the stove and removed a sealed letter. "There is an old ranch beyond Blackstone Pass. A widow and her young son are trying to keep it through the winter. Their hired men left after the first snow warning." Samuel placed the letter on the table. "If the herd is lost, the bank will take the land by spring." Eli looked at the seal. It carried the mark of Crowley Bank. Samuel's voice became quieter. "You will go there tomorrow, no promise from me. No engagement waiting when you return, perhaps no payment at all." Clara stepped forward. "Papa, Blackstone Pass closes in heavy snow." "I know." Eli stared at the letter, then at Clara. Fear moved across her face, but beneath it was something stronger. She did not ask him to refuse. Samuel placed one hand over the envelope. "You asked me to judge your character. I am giving you the chance." Eli reached for the letter. Before his fingers touched it, Samuel added one final truth. "The widow is Silas Crowley's sister." And in that moment, Eli understood that the winter ahead was not only a test of work. Someone powerful wanted that ranch to fail. Eli did not sleep much that night. He lay on a narrow cot in the Dalton bunkhouse with Samuel Hart's letter beneath his coat and his father's broken watch resting in his palm. Around him, the other hands breathed heavily under wool blankets. Wind scratched against the roof, carrying the dry hiss of grass across the yard. The banker had never spoken more than 10 words to Eli, but every one of them had carried the same message. Men without land should know their place. Now Silas's own sister was in danger of losing hers. Just before dawn, Eli rose, packed dried meat, coffee, rope, and an extra blanket, then walked to the stable. His mare, Daisy, lifted her head as he approached. "Going to be a hard road," he whispered. She breathed warm air against his shoulder. By the time the eastern sky turned pale, he was riding north. Blackstone Pass lay nearly 30 miles from Coldwater, between two steep ridges where snow gathered early and left late. The trail climbed through pine forest, crossed a narrow shelf above a frozen creek, then disappeared into country most travelers avoided after October. Eli had passed through once as a boy. He remembered a wagon lying broken at the bottom of a ravine. He remembered his father telling him not to look down. The first few miles were easy. Frost cracked beneath Daisy's hooves and the sky stayed clear. By noon, however, clouds covered the mountains. The wind shifted. Tiny flakes began circling between the trees. Eli pulled his coat tighter. Near the foot of the pass, he heard hoofbeats behind him. He turned. Clara Hart rode toward him on a gray gelding, her brown cloak moving in the wind. A small canvas bundle was tied behind her saddle. Eli stared at her. "You should not be here. That is not much of a greeting. The weather is turning." "I noticed." She stopped beside him. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes were steady. "Your father sent you." "No." "Your mother's." "No." Eli looked back along the trail, half expecting Samuel to appear with a rifle and a very reasonable desire to use it. Clara reached into her saddlebag. "I brought food, matches, and wool socks. Mama packed most of it. She said a man going into the mountains with one blanket has more courage than sense." "That sounds like her. She also sent this." Clara handed him a small tin of salve. "For your hands." Eli looked down. The skin across his knuckles was already cracked from the cold. "Thank her for me." "I will." Neither moved. Snow landed in Clara's hair. Eli wanted to brush it away, but Samuel's unanswered judgment stood between them like a wall. "You cannot come farther," he said. "I know." "Then why did you ride this far?" Her gaze moved toward the dark line of mountains. "Because yesterday, when Papa gave you that letter, you looked at me as if you were asking whether you should go." "I was. And I did not answer." "You did not have to." "I wanted to." She looked back at him. "I am afraid for you, Eli. But I would be more afraid if you became a man who turned away from people in trouble just because helping them cost too much." The words settled deeper than the cold. Clara reached beneath her cloak and removed a narrow blue ribbon. It was faded at one end and had been mended with careful stitches. "My mother tied this around my hair when I was a girl. I kept it after she said I was too old for ribbons." She held it out. Eli hesitated before taking it. "This is not a promise," she said. "I understand. It is only something to remind you that someone expects you to come back." Eli wrapped the ribbon around the chain of his father's watch and tied it firmly. When he looked up, Clara was watching his hands. "Your father may still tell me no," he said. "He may. And you." Her expression softened. "My father is deciding whether you are worthy of me. I am still deciding whether I am brave enough for the life you offer." The answer surprised him more than a declaration would have. He respected her for it. Clara turned her horse. "Do not try to cross the upper trail after dark," she said. "There is an abandoned trapper's cabin 2 miles beyond the split." "How do you know that?" "I was raised by Samuel Hart." Eli smiled. For one brief moment, she smiled too. Then she rode away. He watched until the snowfall swallowed her shape. By late afternoon, the trail had almost vanished. Eli followed marks carved into the trees and reached the trapper's cabin just before dark. The roof leaned, the door hung crooked, and an old nest filled the stone fireplace. It was shelter. He cleared the hearth, built a small fire, and shared dried oats with Daisy beneath the overhang outside. The snow thickened through the night. Sometime after midnight, Eli woke to the sound of a horse screaming. He rose quickly, seized his coat, and stepped outside. Daisy pulled against her rope, ears flat, staring into the trees. At first, Eli saw nothing. Then a lantern moved between the pines. A rider appeared on the trail below the cabin, bent low over a dark horse. Another horse followed behind, dragging something heavy through the snow. Eli moved closer to the firelight. The rider stopped. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then the stranger lifted his face. A thin scar crossed his chin, and a Crowley Bank badge was pinned inside his open coat. "You Mercer?" the man asked. Eli's hand tightened around the doorframe. Who was asking? The stranger glanced at the letter beneath Eli's coat. Someone who thinks you ought to turn around. Behind him, the second horse shifted. The thing tied to its saddle rolled slightly in the snow. It was not cargo. It was a man. Eli stepped into the snow, keeping both hands where the stranger could see them. The man tied behind the second horse gave a weak groan. Get him down, Eli said. The stranger's scar moved as he smiled. You are in no place to give orders. A man can freeze in minutes lying like that. That is not your concern. Eli looked at the badge inside the stranger's coat. Crowley Bank did not give badges to honest clerks. Men who wore them collected debts, removed families, and made certain frightened people sign whatever sealers placed before them. What happened to him? He fell from his horse. The injured man groaned again. This time Eli heard a word. Ranch. The stranger turned sharply. That small movement told Eli more than any answer could have. He stepped toward the trailing horse. The stranger's hand dropped near the revolver at his waist. Take one more step, Mercer, and you will regret it. Daisy pulled against her rope behind the cabin. The fire snapped through the open doorway. Snow gathered on Eli's shoulders. He thought of Samuel Hart asking what kind of man he was. Then he thought of Clara saying she would be more afraid if he turned away because helping cost too much. Eli took another step. The stranger drew his revolver, but before he could raise it, the injured man suddenly rolled from the saddle. His weight pulled the rope loose and frightened the horse. The animal jumped sideways, striking the stranger's mount. Both horses reared. Eli rushed forward. He caught the injured man beneath the shoulders and dragged him away from the hooves. The stranger fought to steady his horse, cursing as the animal spun toward the trees. Leave him, he shouted. Eli pulled the man toward the cabin. The stranger finally brought his mount under control, but the narrow trail had become slick beneath the fresh snow. He pointed the revolver toward Eli, though the frightened horse would not stand still. You were warned, he said. Blackstone Ranch is finished. Anyone who helps it will finish with it. Then he turned and disappeared through the pines. Eli listened until the hoofbeats faded. Only then did he carry the injured man inside. He was perhaps 40, with a weathered face and a coat too thin for the mountains. A dark bruise marked his temple, but there was little blood. His breathing was shallow and one boot was missing. Eli placed him near the fire, wrapped him in the extra blanket, and rubbed warmth back into his hands. The man opened his eyes. Mrs. Bennett, he whispered. Is that the widow at Blackstone? He nodded weakly. My name is Owen Price. I work her cattle. What happened? Owen tried to sit, then fell back. They found me near the lower fence, Voss and another man. Voss? The one with the scar, Boone Voss. Eli poured water into a tin cup and helped him drink. Why did they take you? I saw them cut the western fence. Eli's hand stopped. Owen looked toward the door as if he feared Boone might return. They drove part of the herd into the timber. If the storm comes hard, those cattle will scatter through the ravines. Mrs. Bennett will lose enough stock that she cannot meet the bank payment. So Crowley creates the loss, then takes the ranch for debt. Owen closed his eyes. Silas wants that land. Why? I do not know. Eli looked at Samuel's sealed letter. He had believed he was riding north to save cattle and prove he could endure a difficult winter. Now the work carried a different weight. Silas Crowley was not waiting for the ranch to fail. He was arranging it. Eli opened Samuel's letter for the first time. The message inside was short. Mrs. Rose Bennett. The bearer of this letter is Eli Mercer. I trust his hands, though I am still deciding whether to trust his future. Give him no special treatment. Tell him the truth about what you face. Samuel Hart. Eli read the final sentence twice. Samuel had known there was more to the ranch than weak fences and winter grass. Perhaps he did not know everything, but he had expected Eli to discover something. Owen watched him from the floor. "You should ride back," he said. "Boone will return with help." "Can you sit a horse?" "Not tonight." "Then neither of us is riding anywhere." Eli barred the door and moved Daisy beneath the cabin's broken side shelter. He kept the fire low so its light would not carry far through the trees. For the next 2 hours, he listened to the storm and watched Owen drift between sleep and fever. Near dawn, Owen began speaking without opening his eyes. "Boy cannot know." Eli leaned closer. "What boy?" "Mrs. Bennett's son, Nathan." "What can he not know?" Owen's hand searched across the blanket until it found Eli's sleeve. His uncle was there. Eli frowned. "Selah's?" Owen shook his head. "The night Nathan's father died." Then he slipped back into sleep. Eli sat beside the fire, feeling the broken watch and Clara's blue ribbon in his pocket. Outside, the snowfall slowed. If Owen was telling the truth, the fight over Blackstone Ranch had begun long before a fence was cut. A dead husband, a frightened hired man, and a banker willing to ruin his own sister were all tied to something hidden in those mountains. Eli could have turned south when morning came. Instead, he lifted Owen onto Daisy, took the reins, and began walking toward Blackstone Ranch through knee-deep snow. If Eli's choice to protect a stranger speaks to something in your heart, stay with this story, because the most dangerous truth at Blackstone had not yet been spoken. They reached the valley near midday. The ranch house stood beneath a dark ridge, small and weather-beaten, with smoke rising weakly from one chimney. Several sections of fence lay open. No cattle could be seen in the western field. A woman appeared on the porch holding a rifle. Beside her stood a thin boy of 16. The woman lowered the barrel when she recognized Owen. Then she saw Eli. Her face lost its color. "You have Samuel Hart's letter," she said. Eli nodded. She stared at him as though she had seen a ghost. "Then Samuel sent the wrong man." Before Eli could answer, the boy stepped from the porch and looked directly at the broken watch hanging from Eli's vest. "Where did you get that?" Nathan asked. Eli touched the watch. "It belonged to my father." The boy's eyes filled with fear. "My father had one exactly like it the night he died." Nathan stepped off the porch before his mother could stop him. His eyes stayed fixed on the silver watch hanging from Eli's vest. Snow clung to the boy's boots, but he seemed not to feel the cold. "Let me see it," he said. Rose Bennett lowered her rifle. "Nathan, go inside." "No." The word came out sharper than the boy intended. His face tightened with regret, yet he did not move. Eli slowly removed the watch from its chain and placed it in Nathan's open hand. The boy turned it over. A small pine tree had been carved into the back of the silver case. Beneath it were 2 faint letters. DM. Nathan's fingers began to tremble. "My father's had the same tree," he said, "but his letters were AB." Eli looked toward Rose. "My father was Daniel Mercer." Rose closed her eyes. For one brief moment, the hard strength left her face. She seemed older than she had from the trail. "You truly are Daniel's son," she whispered. "You knew him." Rose opened the door. "Bring Owen inside. We cannot speak out here." The warmth in the ranch house was weak but welcome. A small fire burned in the stone hearth. The room held only a table, 4 chairs, a shelf of chipped dishes, and a wooden clock that had stopped sometime before noon. Eli and Nathan carried Owen into a narrow bedroom and laid him beneath 2 quilts. Rose checked the bruise on his head, then placed a cold cloth across it. "Boone Voss did this?" she asked. Owen's eyes opened slightly. "He cut the western fence." Rose's jaw tightened. "How many cattle are missing?" "Maybe 20, could be more." Nathan moved toward the door. I will find them. You will stay here, Rose said. They are our cattle. And you are my son. We lose the herd, we lose everything. Rose looked at him with a pain she was trying hard to hide. We have already lost enough. Nathan turned away. His hand closed around the back of a chair until his knuckles whitened. Eli recognized the look on the boy's face. It was the same helpless anger he had carried after his own father's death. A child wanted to repair what had broken, even when he had no idea where to place his hands. I will search the western timber, Eli said, once Owen is settled. Nathan looked at him. I am going with you. No. You do not know the land. That is true. I do. Rose began to object, but Eli raised one hand. He can guide me as far as the creek, then he comes back. Nathan frowned. I am not a child. No, Eli said, but your mother has already spent one night wondering whether Owen was alive. She should not spend the next wondering about you. The boy's anger did not disappear, but something in his face softened. Rose studied Eli carefully. You speak like Daniel. Eli turned toward her. My father died when I was 14. No one ever told me he had been here. He was not here long. Rose sat at the table and wrapped both hands around an empty cup. Daniel Mercer and my husband, Amos, worked together when they were young. They drove cattle, repaired wagon roads, and once spent an entire winter cutting timber near Laramie. They bought those watches with their first full wages. Eli looked at the silent watch in his hand. My father never spoke of Amos Bennett. He stopped speaking of many things after the Blackstone claim was filed. What claim? Rose glanced at Nathan. The boy had gone still. Years ago, she said, Amos found something in the northern ridge, not gold. Nothing men sing about in saloons, it was a spring. Eli waited. Fresh water beneath the stone, enough to feed this valley even during drought. A hidden spring could make poor land valuable. It could save cattle when creeks dried and turn an empty valley into grazing country. It could also make a banker rich. Sela's knows, Eli said. Rose nodded. He helped Amos buy this ranch because he believed the water rights would someday belong to him, but Amos placed the land in my name. And then Amos died. The room fell quiet. Nathan looked toward the stopped clock. They said his horse slipped near the ridge, the boy said. Uncle Sela's brought him home. Rose's face tightened. He also brought a paper bearing Amos's signature. It claimed Sela's would receive the northern land if a debt went unpaid. Was the signature real? Eli asked. I believed it was. Believed. Rose rose from the table and crossed to a narrow cabinet. From the bottom drawer, she removed a folded piece of paper stained dark at one corner. I found this last week beneath a loose floorboard in Amos's workshop. She handed it to Eli. It was a short letter written in a hurried hand. Daniel. Sela's knows about the spring. I made a mistake trusting him. The deed he carries is false. If anything happens to me, find Rose and show her what we buried beneath the old meeting pine. Amos. Eli read the message twice. My father received this. I do not know. Amos may never have sent it. Where is the meeting pine? Rose looked toward the dark ridge beyond the window. On the northern land. Nathan spoke quietly. The part Uncle Sela's is trying to take. A horse suddenly galloped into the yard. Everyone turned. The front door opened before Rose could reach her rifle. A heavy man wearing a deputy's coat stepped inside, snow covering his shoulders. He carried an official paper in one gloved hand. Behind him, 3 riders waited near the barn. The deputy looked at Eli, then at Rose. By order of Crowley Bank, he said, this property will be inspected at sunrise tomorrow. If the missing cattle cannot be counted, the loan will be declared unsafe. His gaze moved to Samuel Hart's letter on the table. and anyone interfering with the bank's claim will be arrested. As he turned to leave, Eli noticed the mud on the deputy's boots. Caught in the dried mud was a narrow green needle from a mountain pine, the same kind of pine that grew only along the northern ridge. The deputy left the door open behind him, letting a hard blade of wind cut through the room. Rose crossed the floor and shut it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Nathan pointed toward the window. Those riders came from the north. Eli had noticed the same thing. Snow clung to the horses' lower legs, and one saddle carried a strip of red clay. That clay was not found on the main trail. It came from the northern ridge. The deputy had not ridden from Coldwater. He had been near the meeting pine. "We have until sunrise," Rose said. Eli looked at Owen, who was trying to lift himself from the bed. "You are not going anywhere," Eli told him. "I can ride." "You can barely see straight." Owen pressed one hand against the wall. "The cattle are in the western timber. Boone will move them before morning." Rose looked toward Eli. "If we search for the herd, we cannot reach the pine." "If we search for the pine, the bank will declare the cattle missing." Nathan stepped between them. "We do both." Rose shook her head. "There are not enough of us." "There are if I go after the cattle." "No." Nathan's face hardened. "You cannot keep me inside while men steal what father left us. I am trying to keep you alive. And I am trying to keep his ranch alive." The words struck Rose with more force than the wind. She turned away and gripped the edge of the table. Eli saw the pain in her shoulders. She was not only afraid of losing her son. She was afraid Nathan's anger would lead him toward the same ridge where Amos had died. Eli walked to the window. The last daylight was fading. The storm clouds had broken, but another dark bank hung beyond the mountains. They had perhaps 5 hours before heavy snow returned. He made his choice. "Nathan will guide me to the western timber," he said. "We find enough cattle for the count, then we return." Nathan nodded. "And the pine?" Rose asked. "You go there with Owen." Owen gave a tired laugh. "I thought I was not going anywhere." "You are not riding," Eli said. "You are sitting in the wagon and pointing." Rose looked from one man to the other. "The northern trail is too steep for the wagon." "Not all the way," Owen said. "There is an old logging road below the ridge. It will bring us within half a mile." Eli reached beneath his coat and handed Samuel Hart's letter to Rose. "If the deputy stops you, show him this." "He may not care." "No," Eli said, "but he will know Samuel Hart cares. That may slow him down." Rose studied Eli for a long moment. "You came here to earn permission to court a woman." "I came here because people needed help." "That is not what I asked." "It is the only answer I have." Something changed in Rose's face. She folded Samuel's letter and placed it inside her coat. Within 20 minutes, they were ready. Rose hitched the wagon while Eli saddled Daisy and an older ranch horse for Nathan. Owen sat beneath blankets with a lantern at his feet and a rifle resting across his knees. Before they separated, Rose caught Nathan by the sleeve. "Come back before the snow." "I will." "Do not say that lightly." Nathan looked at his mother. His anger faded. "I will come back," he said again. This time it sounded like a promise. Eli and Nathan rode west, while Rose guided the wagon north. The timber swallowed them quickly. Broken branches and hoof marks made the trail easy to follow at first. The missing cattle had been driven fast, too fast for winter ground. Several tracks slipped near the creek, and dark hair clung to the bark of a pine. Nathan dismounted and touched it. They were frightened. "Boone wanted them hard to gather," Eli said. They followed the tracks deeper into the trees. The moon rose behind thin clouds. Its light turned the snow pale blue. Every sound seemed close. A branch snapping, a horse breathing, ice cracking somewhere beneath the creek. After an hour, they found the first cattle huddled in a narrow hollow. 7 cows and 2 calves stood against the rocks, exhausted but alive. Nathan let out a breath. We need more. First, we move these toward the ranch. Together, they pushed the animals back along the trail. It was slow work. One calf stumbled twice. Another cow refused to cross a frozen patch until Eli dismounted and led her by the halter. By the time they reached the creek, snow had begun to fall. Then Nathan's horse lifted its head. A low sound came through the trees. Cattle. Many of them. Nathan turned toward the ridge. The rest are close. Eli looked at the sky. We take these home. If we leave now, Boone may move the others. We have enough to prove someone scattered them. Not enough for the bank count. Nathan pulled his horse around. Eli caught the reins. You promised your mother. I promised to come back. Then do it. I cannot return with half the herd while the other half is still out here. The boy's voice broke on the last word. Eli saw more than stubbornness in him. Nathan believed every lost cow was another piece of his father disappearing. Eli released the reins. 10 minutes, he said, no farther than the next rise. They left the 9 cattle near the creek and rode uphill. At the top, they found a second hollow. More than 20 animals were trapped behind a crude barrier made from fallen trees. Nathan smiled for the first time that night. Then a lantern appeared on the far side of the clearing. Boone Voss stepped from behind the trees. 2 armed riders stood with him. You should have taken the warning, Boone said. Eli moved his horse in front of Nathan. Boone looked toward the trapped cattle, then back at Eli. The boy can leave. Nathan's hand tightened around his reins. And Eli, he asked. Boone smiled. Mercer is coming with us. If this family's fight for their home has touched your heart, stay with the story, because one choice in this forest will change every life at Blackstone. Boone raised his revolver. Before Eli could move, a gunshot cracked from somewhere above the clearing. Boone's lantern shattered. Darkness fell over the snow. Then a woman's voice called from the ridge. Step away from Daniel Mercer's son. Eli froze. He knew that voice. Clara Hart had followed him into the mountains. For one stunned second, no one moved. Snow drifted through the darkness where Boone's lantern had shattered. The cattle pressed against one another behind the fallen logs. Horses stamped and pulled at their reins. Then Clara's gray gelding appeared along the ridge. She sat straight in the saddle with Samuel Hart's old Winchester braced against her shoulder. Her brown cloak moved in the wind, and her face was pale but steady. Boone Voss lowered himself behind a tree. You nearly hit me, he called. I hit exactly what I aimed at. Eli knew the rifle. Samuel kept it above the ranch house door and cleaned it every Sunday evening. Clara had probably learned to use it before she had learned to bake bread. That knowledge did not ease Eli's fear. Clara, he said, stay where you are. She looked toward him. I did not ride this far to stand where I am told. Nathan almost smiled despite the danger. One of Boone's men shifted behind the cattle barrier. Clara moved the rifle slightly. Do not, she warned. The man stopped. Boone's voice came from the trees. You cannot keep that rifle on 3 men. No, Clara said, but I only need to keep it on the first one who moves. Eli used the darkness to slide from his saddle. He motioned for Nathan to do the same. The boy obeyed. Boone heard their boots strike the snow. Mercer, he called, you are making this worse. You cut the fence, you scattered the herd, you took Owen. I follow orders. That does not make you innocent. Boone gave a low laugh. Innocence is a word used by people who have never owed money. A rider moved on the far side of the hollow. Eli saw a pale shape between the trees and threw himself toward Nathan. A shot cracked. The bullet struck a branch above them. Snow fell in a white cloud. Clara fired again. The second rider's horse bolted, carrying him into the timber. The third man cursed and turned after him. Boone remained behind the tree. Eli grabbed Nathan's arm and pulled him toward the fallen logs. "Open the barrier," he said. Nathan stared at him. "The cattle will run." "That is the idea." Together they dragged one of the smaller branches aside. The cattle nearest the opening pushed forward. The others followed, frightened by the gunfire. Within seconds, the hollow filled with movement. Cows broke through the gap and scattered across the snow. Boone stepped from cover, trying to avoid the herd. Eli rushed him. They struck the ground hard. Boone's revolver slid beneath a fallen branch. He swung once, catching Eli across the cheek, then reached for a knife inside his coat. Eli trapped his wrist. They struggled in the snow, while hooves thundered around them. Boone was heavier, but Eli had spent years controlling animals stronger than any man. He turned Boone's arm, forced the knife loose, and pressed him face down against the frozen earth. Nathan picked up the revolver. His hand trembled as he aimed it at Boone. Boone looked over his shoulder. "You think holding that makes you a man?" Nathan's finger tightened. Eli saw the anger in the boy's face. He saw Amos Bennett's death, the stolen cattle, and years of fear gathering in one small movement. "Nathan," Eli said quietly, "he deserves it." "Maybe." Boone's smile disappeared. "But your mother deserves to see you come home as yourself." Nathan's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. For a long moment, the revolver remained raised. Then he lowered it. Eli took the weapon and removed the cartridges. Clara rode down from the ridge. The moment she reached the hollow, Eli stood and went to her. Her chin lifted. "That you might need help. You could have been hurt. So could you. That is different." "It is not different to me." The words silenced him. Snow gathered on her eyelashes. She looked exhausted, frightened, and angry enough to hide both. "How did you find us?" he asked. "I returned home after leaving you at the pass. Papa had ridden to town. Mama told me about Silas Crowley's proposal and the threats he made when Father refused him." Clara glanced toward Boone. "Then a ranch hand found this caught on our south gate." She reached inside her cloak and held out a strip of paper. On it, written in thick black ink, were 6 words. "Mercer will not return by spring." Eli read the message twice. "Why did you come alone?" "I did not." A whistle sounded from the lower trail. Samuel Hart rode into the clearing with 2 ranch hands behind him. His expression was calm, which Eli knew meant his anger had gone beyond words. Samuel looked first at Clara, then at Eli, then at Boone lying in the snow. "I leave my house for half a day," he said, "and my daughter steals my rifle." "I borrowed it," Clara replied. "You fired it." "It worked." Samuel looked at the shattered lantern. "So it did." He dismounted and tied Boone's hands with a length of rope. "Where is Rose Bennett?" he asked. Eli explained the divided search and the meeting pine. Samuel's face changed. "You sent her north." "She had Owen with her. The deputy was already on that ridge." "I know." "No," Samuel said, "you do not." He pulled Boone to his knees. "Tell him." Boone looked away. Samuel tightened the rope. "Tell Eli what Sila's planned for tonight." Boone's face had lost its confidence. "The cattle were only meant to keep you busy," he muttered. Eli felt the cold deepen around him. What was the real plan? Boone looked toward the northern ridge. Sila's new Rose had found Amos's letter. He let her believe there was proof beneath the meeting pine. Nathan stepped forward. "What is really there?" Boone swallowed. "Nothing." A distant sound rolled across the mountains. Not thunder. An explosion. The ground beneath their boots trembled. A dark cloud of smoke rose beyond the northern ridge. Nathan whispered, "Mama." Eli turned toward Daisy, but Samuel caught his arm. "The old logging road crosses a narrow ledge," Samuel said. "If Silas used blasting powder, the road may be gone." Nathan ran for his horse. Eli mounted beside him. Clara reached for Eli's sleeve. "Bring them back." He looked at the blue ribbon tied around his broken watch. Then he looked into her eyes. "I will do everything I can." Eli and Nathan rode north through the falling snow, with Samuel and the ranch hands close behind. When they reached the ridge, the logging road ended at a wall of broken earth. Below them, Rose's wagon hung over the ravine, held by one splintered wheel and a single pine root. Owen clung to the rear rail. Rose was nowhere in sight. Nathan shouted for his mother before his horse had fully stopped. His voice fell into the ravine and returned as a weak echo. No answer came back. The wagon hung at an angle below the broken road. One rear wheel had slipped over the edge, while the front axle rested against a shelf of stone. A pine root stretched beneath the frame, bent so tightly that strips of bark had begun to peel away. Owen clung to the rear rail with one arm. "Rose went over," he called. "She is on the ledge below me." Eli dropped from Daisy and crawled toward the edge. The blast had torn away nearly 12 feet of road. Loose soil slid beneath his knees. Far below, black rocks rose through the snow like broken teeth. He found Rose 10 feet beneath the wagon. She lay on a narrow shelf of stone, one hand gripping a small pine branch. Her other arm was pressed against her ribs. Snow covered her hair and shoulders. "Mrs. Bennett," Eli called. Her eyes opened. "Owen. He is holding on." "Nathan." "Right behind me." Rose tried to lift her head. "Do not let him come down." Nathan was already moving toward the edge. Eli turned quickly. "Stay back." "That is my mother. And if the ground gives way, she will watch you fall." The boy froze. Samuel dismounted and surveyed the road. His eyes moved from the wagon to the damaged slope, then to the trees above them. "We anchor a rope to those 2 pines," he said. "One man goes down for Rose, another secures Owen." "I am going," Eli said. Samuel looked at the cut across Eli's cheek and the snow frozen to his coat. "You have been riding since yesterday." "I am still going." Samuel did not argue. The ranch hands carried ropes from their saddles. One tied a strong loop around the base of the largest pine. The other tested every knot twice. The wind moved through the ridge, making the damaged wagon creak below them. Clara arrived while they worked. Her gelding was breathing hard, and Boone Voss was tied to a lead rope behind her saddle. Eli stared at her. "I told you to stay at Blackstone." "You told me you would do everything you could," she replied. "So will I." She dismounted and handed Boone's rope to one of Samuel's men. Samuel glanced at her. "Your mother will hear about this." "She usually does." Despite everything, Nathan gave a small, frightened laugh. The sound lasted only a second, but it loosened something inside him. Samuel tied the rescue rope around Eli's waist. "You go down slowly," he said. "Do not trust any rock until you test it." Eli looked over the edge again. The blue ribbon on his watch moved in the wind. Clara noticed him touch it. "Come back with them," she said. Eli nodded. Then he stepped backward into the ravine. Snow broke loose beneath his boots as the men lowered him. He kept one hand on the rope and searched for solid ground with the other. Twice, loose stones fell away beneath him. Rose watched from the ledge. When Eli reached her, he found that her ankle was trapped beneath a broken section of wagon board. "You should have gone after the cattle," she whispered. "We found them. All of them. Enough." A faint smile touched her face. "Amos would have liked you." Eli braced one boot against the rock and lifted the board. Rose pulled her ankle free, but when she tried to stand, pain crossed her face. "It may be broken," she said. "I will carry you." Before he could lift her, Rose reached inside her coat and removed a small leather pouch. "I found this near the meeting pine. You said Boone claimed nothing was there." "He lied." Eli opened the pouch. Inside rested a brass key and a narrow piece of folded cloth. The cloth had once been white, but age and soil had darkened it. A name had been stitched into one corner. "Daniel Mercer." Eli stopped breathing for a moment. "My father was here." Rose nodded. The deputy reached the pine before us. He was digging beside the roots when Owen fired into the air. The deputy fled, but the blast went off before we could turn the wagon. "What does the key open?" "I do not know. There was no deed beneath the tree, only the pouch." A sharp crack sounded above them. The pine root holding the wagon began to split. "Owen," Rose cried. The wagon dropped several inches. Owen's grip slipped. Eli pulled Rose close and shouted toward the ridge. "Lift her now." The rope tightened around his waist. Samuel and the ranch hands began hauling. Eli wrapped both arms around Rose as they rose from the ledge. Above them, Nathan knelt at the edge with terror in his eyes. "Hold on, Mamet." Rose looked upward. "I am here." The wagon shifted again. Owen shouted as the rear rail tore loose. Clara seized the second rope and tied it around her waist. Samuel caught her arm. "No. There is no time. You do not have the strength to pull him up." "I do not need to pull him. I need to reach him." Before Samuel could stop her, Clara took the rope, lowered herself over the edge, and swung toward the wagon. Eli and Rose were nearly at the top when Clara reached Owen. "Take my hand," she called. Owen tried, but the wagon moved beneath him. The pine root broke. The wagon fell. Clara caught Owen's wrist as the frame disappeared into the ravine. The force jerked her against the cliff. Her shoulder struck stone, but she did not let go. "Pull," Samuel roared. Nathan grabbed the rope beside his father. Together, the men hauled Clara and Owen toward safety. A moment later, Eli lifted Rose over the edge. Nathan fell beside her in the snow. For the first time since Eli had met him, the boy did not hide his tears. Rose touched his face with a trembling hand. "I came back," he said. "So did I." Clara and Owen were pulled over the ridge soon after. Clara held her shoulder, her face white with pain, yet she managed to look toward Eli. He held up the leather pouch. Her eyes narrowed. "What is it?" "Something my father buried." Boone Voss, still tied near the horses, stared at the brass key. The color drained from his face. Samuel saw it. "You know what that opens," he said. Boone lowered his head. No one spoke until a voice came from the dark trail behind them. "It opens the box that could hang Silas Crowley." The deputy stepped from the trees with both hands raised. His coat was torn, blood marked one temple, and fear filled his eyes. Then he looked directly at Nathan. "Your father did not die from a fall," he said, "and Daniel Mercer died because he tried to prove it." The deputy's confession changed the cold around them. Until that moment, the danger had lived in broken fences, missing cattle and men riding with orders from Crowley Bank. Now it reached backward 10 years, to 2 dead fathers and a secret buried beneath a pine. Nathan rose slowly from beside his mother. "What did you say?" The deputy lowered his hands. "My name is Warren Hale. I have served Silas Crowley for 6 years. I told myself I was enforcing contracts. Tonight proved what I truly was." Samuel stepped between Warren and the others. "Speak plainly." Warren looked at Boone, who would not meet his eyes. Amos Bennett discovered that Silas had forged the Northern Land Agreement. Amos planned to expose him. He wrote to Daniel Mercer because Daniel had witnessed the original purchase. Eli's fingers closed around the brass key. My father never received the letter. He did, Warren said. Amos sent a boy to deliver it. Daniel came to Blackstone 3 days later. Rose pressed one hand against her ribs. You were there. I was 17. I worked in Silas's stable. The shame in Warren's voice did not soften Samuel's expression. What happened? Daniel and Amos hid their proof in an iron strongbox. Bank ledgers, the true deed, and a statement naming the men who had helped Silas forge signatures. They planned to ride to the territorial judge at first light. Warren glanced toward the ravine. Silas learned of it before they could leave. Nathan's face had gone still. My father's horse did not slip. No. The answer was quiet, but it struck the boy like a blow. Rose reached for him. Nathan did not turn away, though his hands curled into fists. Warren continued. Silas met Amos on the ridge. They argued. Boone was there. So was another hired man. Amos was struck and placed near the trail to make the death appear accidental. Nathan lunged forward. Eli caught him around the shoulders. Let me go. Boone looked at the ground. I never touched your father, he said. You helped hide the truth, Nathan shouted. Boone had no answer. Eli held Nathan until the boy stopped fighting. He understood that rage. He had carried his own for years without knowing where to place it. What happened to Daniel? Eli asked. Warren looked at him with wet eyes. Daniel escaped with the strongbox key. Silas followed him south. A week later, word came that Daniel Mercer had died after being thrown from his horse. Eli thought of the broken watch, stopped at 12 minutes past 4. He had always believed his father's death was a cruel accident. Now the watch felt heavier than silver. Did Silas kill him? I cannot prove it, Warren said, but Silas returned wearing Daniel's blood on one sleeve. Clara moved close to Eli. She did not speak. Her uninjured hand found his, and he held it tightly. Samuel looked at the key. Where is the strongbox? Daniel moved it before he fled, Warren replied. Silas searched the ridge for years. Last month he found an old stable boy who remembered Daniel carrying a box toward Coldwater. Eli's mind raced. His father had owned nothing when he died. No land, no savings, no hidden chest, only the silver watch. Then he remembered the words engraved inside the watch lid. He had seen them so often that they had become almost meaningless. Time keeps what men forget. Eli opened the watch. The stopped hands rested at 12 minutes past 4. Beneath them, scratches marked the metal plate. He had always assumed they came from age. Now he looked closer. 4 short lines, 1 long line, 2 short lines. Not scratches. Directions. Samuel leaned near. Those are survey marks. Clara's eyes widened. 4 east, 1 north, 2 below. Below what? Nathan asked. Eli stared at the carved pine tree on the back of the case. The meeting pine was not the hiding place, it was the starting point. Warren shook his head. Silas will already be returning there. He believes the blast destroyed anyone who found the key, Samuel said. That gives us a little time. Rose tried to rise. Pain forced her back into the snow. You cannot take her over the ridge, Eli said. I am going, Nathan replied. So am I, Clara said. Eli turned toward her injured shoulder. You can barely move your arm. I can still ride. Samuel's face showed what he thought of that idea, but he knew argument would waste the time they did not have. They built a rough splint for Rose's ankle and placed her on a gentle horse. One ranch hand stayed beside her and Owen. The second guarded Boone. Warren led the others toward the meeting pine. The storm weakened as they climbed, leaving the ridge under a pale moon. Broken earth surrounded the old tree. Fresh shovel marks cut through its exposed roots. Eli stood before the trunk and opened the watch again. 4 east. They measured 4 long paces toward a cluster of stone. 1 north. A single pace brought Eli beside a flat rock half buried in snow. 2 below. Nathan and Samuel cleared the snow. Beneath the rock lay a narrow opening framed by old timber. Clara lifted the lantern. Inside was a small iron door. Eli placed the brass key in its lock. Before he could turn it, hoofbeats sounded behind them. Silas Crowley rode onto the ridge with 6 armed men. His polished coat was dusted with snow, and his calm face held no surprise. "I hoped Daniel's boy would be clever enough to find it," Silas said. Eli stepped in front of the iron door. "You used us." Silas smiled faintly. "I needed the key and the watch together." His gaze shifted toward Clara. "Samuel should have accepted my offer. It would have spared everyone this trouble." Samuel raised his rifle. Silas's men did the same. For one dangerous moment, the ridge held its breath. Then Warren Hale rode out from behind the meeting pine. "I have confessed everything," he said. Silas looked almost amused. "To whom?" A lantern answered from the southern trail. Then another. More than 20 riders emerged through the trees. At their front was Margaret Hart, seated on a black horse beside the Coldwater judge. Clara stared at her mother. Margaret lifted one eyebrow. "You took Samuel's rifle," she said. "I took the town." If this stand for truth has held your heart, stay with the story, because wealth had protected Silas Crowley for years, but it could not protect him from everyone he had wronged. The judge dismounted and faced Silas. "Lower your weapons." Silas's smile disappeared. One of his men obeyed. Then another. But Silas reached inside his coat, not for a revolver, but for a folded paper and a burning match. "The law cannot judge what no longer exists," he said. And before anyone could stop him, he dropped the flame toward the iron door. The match fell toward the iron door. Clara moved first. She swept her boot through the snow, sending a white spray across the stone. The flame vanished with a hiss before it reached the folded paper in Silas Crowley's hand. Silas stared at her. "You always were stubborn." Clara stood beside Eli, one arm held close because of her injured shoulder. "My father calls it judgment." Margaret Hart rode closer, the lantern in her hand casting light across the ridge. "I call it something she inherited from both of us." The Coldwater judge stepped forward. Silas Crowley placed the paper on the ground. Silas looked at the riders surrounding him. Ranchers, shopkeepers, widows, and former borrowers filled the trail. Some had lost land to Crowley Bank. Others had spent years making payments that never seemed to lower their debt. For the first time, Silas could not control the room. He dropped the paper. His hired men lowered their weapons one after another. Boone Voss watched from beside the pine, his hands still tied. When Silas looked toward him for help, Boone turned his face away. Samuel Hart took the brass key from Eli and placed it back in his palm. "Open it." Eli knelt before the small iron door. The key resisted at first. Rust held the lock tight. He pressed harder until something clicked deep inside the stone. The door opened. Behind it sat a black strongbox wrapped in oilcloth. Nathan helped Eli pull it free. The box was heavier than it looked, and one corner had begun to rust. A second lock guarded the lid, but the same brass key opened it. Inside lay 3 leather books, several sealed statements, and 2 folded deeds. Rose moved closer on horseback, her injured ankle tied in a splint. Owen rode beside her, pale but awake. The judge opened the first ledger beneath Margaret's lantern. Every page held names, dates, loans, and payments. Some entries had been changed in darker ink. Others showed land transferred to Crowley Bank even after the debt had been paid. Warren Hale pointed toward a line near the bottom. "That is the Bennett account. Silas added charges after Amos died." Rose closed her eyes. Nathan put one hand on her horse's neck. The judge opened one of the sealed statements. It carried the signatures of Amos Bennett and Daniel Mercer. He read silently for a moment, then looked toward Silas. "This names you as the man who ordered the false deed." Silas's calm expression finally broke. "Two dead men cannot testify." "No," the judge replied, "but their signed statements can be examined, and your own ledgers support every word." Silas stepped backward. Samuel moved between him and the trail. "You have nowhere to go." Silas's eyes shifted from the gathered townspeople to the steep slope behind the meeting pine. Then he ran. He shoved past one of his own riders, seized the man's horse, and pulled himself into the saddle. Before anyone could close the path, he drove the animal toward the narrow northern trail. Nathan turned his horse after him. "Nathan, no," Rose cried. The boy did not stop. Eli mounted Daisy and followed. The northern trail curved above the same ravine where the wagon had fallen. Snow covered the damaged ground, hiding the cracks left by the blast. Silas rode without looking back. Nathan gained on him. "You will answer for my father," the boy shouted. Silas turned in the saddle. "Your father should have minded his own affairs." Nathan's horse leaped forward. The ground beneath them gave a deep groan. Eli saw the crack spread across the trail. "Turn back." Nathan pulled his reins, but too late. A section of the ridge collapsed. Silas's horse fell onto its side near the edge. Nathan was thrown into the snow. Both slid toward the ravine as the earth broke away beneath them. Eli jumped from Daisy and caught Nathan's coat with both hands. The force pulled Eli to his knees. Nathan clung to his wrist. A few feet away, Silas held a pine root with one hand. His boots hung over open air. "Help me," Silas shouted. Eli looked from Nathan to the banker. For years, Silas had used fear to take from others. He had destroyed families, hidden the truth about 2 deaths, and threatened everyone Eli cared about. One small choice could allow the mountain to decide his fate. Then Eli heard his father's voice in his memory. "A man should never make a promise he cannot keep." Eli had promised Clara he would do everything he could. He pulled Nathan onto solid ground, tied a rope around the boy's waist, and pushed the other end toward Silas. Silas stared at it. "Take it," Eli said. "You would save me. I will not become you just because you deserve judgment." Silas caught the rope. Samuel and the others reached the ridge and helped pull both men to safety. The judge placed Silas under guard. Nathan stood before him, shaking with anger and cold. "You took my father." Silas looked at the ground. After a long silence, he spoke. "I ordered Boone to stop Amos. I did not tell him to kill him." Boone's voice came from behind the riders. "You told us no witness could reach town." The judge turned toward him. Boone lowered his head. "I will give a full statement." Rose held Nathan as the last of his anger gave way to grief. Back at the meeting pine, Clara found a small envelope beneath the ledgers. The writing across its front had faded, but the name remained clear. "For Eli, when he is old enough to understand." Eli recognized his father's hand. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a letter and a final deed. He read the first lines, then stopped. Samuel watched him carefully. "What does it say?" Eli lifted the deed toward the lantern. The hidden spring and half of Blackstone Ranch had never belonged only to Amos Bennett. Daniel Mercer's name was written beside his, and beneath it as lawful heir was Eli S. Eli stared at his name on the deed until the letters blurred. For years, he had believed his father had left him nothing except a broken watch and a promise about honesty. Now the strongbox told a different story. Daniel Mercer had owned half the northern land, half the hidden spring, and half the future Silas Crowley had tried to steal. Samuel Hart took the deed and examined the seal. "It is valid," the judge said. The land passed to Eli when Daniel died. Rose looked at Eli across the lantern light. Amos never told me. Perhaps he meant to, Eli said. Nathan stepped closer. Then Blackstone belongs to you. Half of it does. The boy's face fell. Eli understood at once. Nathan had fought all winter believing the ranch was the final piece of his father. Now, on the same night the truth was found, he feared losing part of it again. Eli folded the deed carefully. My father trusted Amos Bennett, he said. That is why their names are together. Rose watched him. What are you saying? I am saying Daniel Mercer did not hide this land, so his son could take it from Amos Bennett's family. Eli placed the deed in Rose's hands. When the court clears the false debt, we draw a new agreement. You and Nathan keep your home. I keep my share in the spring and the northern pasture. We run the ranch together. Nathan stared at him. You would do that? I know what it is to lose a father, and then spend years wondering what he would have wanted. Eli looked at the broken watch. I think mine would want me to keep the promise he could not return to finish. Rose pressed the deed against her chest. For the first time since Eli had arrived at Blackstone, the fear left her face. Silas Crowley was taken to Coldwater before sunrise. Boone Voss and Warren Hale rode under guard beside him. Warren had confessed late, but his testimony helped uncover years of fraud. Boone gave the judge the names of every man involved in Amos Bennett's death. No crowd gathered for revenge. The people of Coldwater gathered for truth. Over the following weeks, the court froze every claim held by Crowley Bank. Families brought old receipts, letters, and loan papers. The ledgers from the strongbox showed where payments had been changed and where land had been taken without cause. Silas lost the bank before winter ended. Months later, he was convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and ordering the attack that led to Amos Bennett's death. The law did not return the dead, but it returned ranches, homes, and names to the people who had been robbed. Rose Bennett's debt was erased. The hidden spring was recorded under the rightful names of the Bennett and Mercer families. Blackstone Ranch survived. The cattle count at sunrise was short by 3 head, but the judge had already seen the cut fences and false records. Samuel's ranch hands found the last animals 2 days later in a narrow canyon. Nathan worked beside Eli through the rest of the winter. At first, he tried to prove himself by doing everything too quickly. Eli taught him to slow down, watch the weather, and listen to the animals. You do not have to save the whole ranch before breakfast, Eli told him one morning. Nathan leaned on his shovel. You sound like my mother. That should concern us both. Nathan laughed. It was the first easy laugh anyone had heard from him in a long time. Clara stayed at Blackstone until Rose could walk again. Her shoulder healed slowly. She never admitted how much it hurt, but Eli noticed the way she lowered heavy pans with both hands and avoided reaching above her head. One evening, he found her outside the barn watching snow fall across the northern pasture. You should be inside, he said. So should you. I live here now. She looked toward the ranch house. Is that what this is? For the winter. And after? Eli touched the blue ribbon still tied around his father's watch. After I return to your father and hear his answer. Clara lowered her eyes. You own land now. Half a difficult ranch with broken fences and a barn that leans east. You own a spring. I also own $6. The winter has been expensive. She smiled, but sadness remained behind it. Do you think the land changes what you asked him? No. Why not? Because I did not ask to marry you after becoming a landowner. I asked when I had almost nothing. Clara looked at him then. And if he says no? Eli stepped closer. I will ask you what you say. Spring reached Blackstone late. On the first clear morning in April, Eli rode south toward the Hart Ranch. The mountains still carried snow, but water ran beneath the ice, and green grass had begun to show near the creeks. He wore the same coat, his boots were still worn, the silver watch remained broken. Samuel stood on the porch when Eli arrived. Margaret was beside him. Clara waited inside the open doorway. Eli removed his hat. "Mr. Hart, I came for your answer." Samuel studied him with the same hard eyes he had used months earlier. "You found land." "Yes, sir." "You helped save a family." "Yes, sir." "You uncovered what happened to your father." "Yes, sir." Samuel folded his arms. "Then I suppose you believe you passed my test." Eli looked toward Clara. "No, sir." Samuel raised one eyebrow. "I learned there was no test I could finish. A hard winter does not prove a man will always be good. Money does not prove he will always be useful. Land does not prove he will always be loyal." The porch became quiet. "All I can do is choose the kind of man I will be each day, and hope Clara sees enough truth in me to choose the life beside it." Samuel looked at his daughter. Clara stepped onto the porch. "I already have." Margaret covered her smile with one hand. Samuel let out a long breath. "Then it appears my answer is no longer the important one." He held out his hand to Eli. "But for what it is worth, you have it." Eli took it. Samuel's grip was firm, but his eyes had softened. They were married in June beneath a cottonwood tree near the Hart Creek. Rose and Nathan came from Blackstone. Owen stood with the ranch hands. Margaret cried openly. Samuel pretended the wind had put dust in his eyes. Clara tied the faded blue ribbon around Eli's broken watch and placed it in his palm before the ceremony. "Do you still want to repair it?" she asked. Eli closed the case. "No." "Why?" "Because it did not stop when my father died." He looked toward Rose, Nathan, Samuel, and the families whose land had been returned. "It waited until I understood what he left me." Years later, Blackstone became one of the strongest ranches in the valley. Nathan grew into a careful rancher. Rose planted flowers beside the house. Samuel visited often, always claiming he had come to inspect the cattle. Eli and Clara built a small home near the hidden spring. Above their fireplace hung the silent silver watch, its blue ribbon faded by time. It never counted another minute. It did not need to. The land, the family, and the lives repaired around it measured everything that mattered. If this story reminded you that a good heart is worth more than a full purse, share it with someone who still believes character can change a family's future. And remember, the richest gift a person leaves behind is not always land or money. Sometimes it is the courage to do what is right when no reward has been promised.